stories like this across Reddit and various other places have shown the eroding and decay of what many people deem to be the fraternity or brotherhood of the military, which is known as the Chief Petty Officer Mess of the United States Navy. There is no other branch that has a mess like this or has this fraternity brotherhood of this style from the ranks of E7, E8, and E9. And we have seen even the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy, the most senior Chief Petty Officer of the entire Navy, trying to steer this ship around 180 degrees as he released several memos and letters trying to culture change as much as possible, as he's seen from the top down that this is not a good look. But let's go to the post that's over on Reddit right now that has essentially blown up everywhere, from Instagram, Facebook, freaking Reddit, everywhere else, as people are like, this isn't right. Now, I have to disclaimer before I even discuss this, I have not been through Chief season, so I can't talk on rules, regulations, things like that to that specification, but I will speak in generality of the military and policies which would supersede anything that this actually goes against already. This was 2 days ago from Haze and Abuse USN, obviously trying to use a fake name here. They say, throwaway, although I realize anyone passingly familiar with my story will recognize me. During Chief season of 2021, I received a phone call from a friend who had seen my name come out on the selection board for direct commission. My package, originally put in February of 2021, was lost for the spring selection cycle and resubmitted for the fall. This is something that I was aware of but had kept quiet throughout the season, as I neither felt that nor wanted anyone to think I was less than fully committed. I confided the news in one of my local chiefs and asked them what I should do. They asked me to trust the mess and to tell them, thinking at worst I would get some additional ribbing. So I did. I trusted the mess. It should be noted here that essentially years and ages ago, there was a huge culture of like, if you're trying to become a commissioned officer, that the chief's mess was not going to mess with you. And essentially at that point, you could count your days as being numbered essentially until you would retire, because you were never going to be made into a chief and you would always be known as that person that was trying to become an officer. Now, in current day society, that's not so much, but it is sad to see that there are people that I've personally known that have obviously tried to apply for commissioning as well, that essentially have been told, you're not trying to be one of us, so don't even act like you are one of us. And that's been the single biggest mistake of my entire naval career. The season chair immediately wanted me pulled from season. I was literally told, you shouldn't have told me. I was stunned. After weeks of pounding the ideals of honor, courage, and commitment into our heads, I was explicitly told I should have lied and highly implied I was foolish for even daring to think I'd be allowed to finish season. He took the decision back to our wider mess, who had mixed reactions, but ultimately did allow me to finish out the last week of my class. I was shaken, but thought the worst of it was behind me going into final week. I was wrong. So people that are not Navy, I have to stress this, that the stress she is under is essentially being told, yes, you will wear the rank and you will not be accepted to the mess or the brotherhood that this is, and essentially that she would be an E7 and not a Chief Petty Officer, and at that point that would make you indefinitely not effective as a leader. And saying, what if she didn't make it through Officer Candidate School? What if she didn't make it through that training? She would be stuck as an E7 and never be fully accepted into the officer role because she never made it through Officer Candidate School, but also never be fully accepted inside the Chief Petty Officer mess, which is a huge deal. I found out afterwards that even having an entire quotations final week is not the season standard, and a number of chiefs at other commands I talked to afterwards were absolutely floored that events of final night would be spread out and padded across the entire week. But that's what my local class faced. Even now, I can't tell you what marching around carrying a 200-pound anchor as we moved from planned humiliation to planned humiliation has to do with naval leadership. What I can tell you, however, is that I was getting fewer than 3 hours of sleep per night, spending most of it shivering in the cold and wet November weather, as our mess really had not accounted for the difference in temperatures from August when season usually occurs. I have to stress that final week, or this final night that happens, is a culmination of events that essentially is like the final exercise that would allow you to say you are a chief, you're accepted, and you've made it through. It's like a battle stations per se for people that have not been through, or the crucible for people that are Marines, for example, trying to give that stress of what this means exactly. And when she talks about the mess being done in a season of August versus November, that's because when COVID happened, everything pretty much shifted as far as results go. So I believe as 2021 was the first year that everything happened kind of in this November time period, and they called it the winter Chiefs mess, and they even joked with memes that winter is coming. Kind of talking about how like be prepared for this. And I do remember specifically in my own anecdotal evidence that I did have Chiefs that said they couldn't do certain things because of the cold weather, because they did acclimate or understand that the season was not going to happen during that time. So I don't want to say this was across the entire mess, but this is her individual anecdotal story. I can also tell you they took a certain amount of twisted joy in quotations testing the blood trader that was planning to go over to quotations the dark side. Planned events that were uniform for the rest of my classmates had special little things interjected just for me. Does that sound a little bit like hazing? Like not everyone was treated the same? You were singled out? Almost like most chief petty officers would have been trained on hazing and harassment type issues as they've gone through various trainings through season previously and probably have had to deal with certain circumstances like this as well. I find that crazy. And on Friday, November 19th, 2021, the final day before pinning, they successfully broke me. I can't really say specifically what did it as there were so many contributing factors. That night, we had been kept up until after 2 a.m. and had to get back up at 5 a.m. There was the overall physical fatigue from marching miles and running obstacle courses and a million other smaller events. But the thing that really pushed me over the edge was that in 50-degree weather, they had us take the plunge in quotations to turn our whites khaki. And when I went into that cold water, something in my mind simply unraveled. It's difficult for me to describe, even now. I felt like I was floating and only partially in control of my body. I could not stop shivering. The few who would talk to me afterwards told me I was acting and saying things completely unlike myself at some point. I remember wandering around the field we were running obstacles on and just desperately trying to convey that I needed to go to the hospital. Dozens of genuines came up to me trying to figure out what was wrong, including the chair and co-chair. Something in my mind had shattered and I couldn't vocalize it. And here I am, a person that's worked in medical side of this. I'm like, these are, I don't know, the entire list of things that somebody could have experienced having hypothermia, which could actually throw somebody into arrhythmias. Those are things that are improperly conducting the beats of your heart that could kill you. And let's also not forget that only a couple years ago, there was a death that did happen during the season that essentially made a lot of people push the brakes and say, we need to reevaluate this and understand what is the purpose of initiation and getting people to become chief petty officers through this 6-week process. She says, instead of help, I was told if I went to the hospital, I wouldn't be able to finish. I wouldn't be able to be quotations accepted. And to my fragmented mind, the thought of not being quotations accepted by the people who were literally keeping me and my class in a fenced compound with our car keys and cell phones confiscated. Controlling contact with our family members was the most terrifying prospect I'd ever heard in my life. I can already tell you this is opening a can of worms of people that could attest to this and show neglect of their duties to report for healthcare of individuals that they were directly observing, where I'm like, this is now 2 years from now. And essentially, I don't know what's going to happen with this part of the story, but I will say if there's enough eyes to let this Chiefs mess crack under an IG investigation, I would be very surprised if everybody didn't have conflicting, overlapping stories, and if the Chiefs mess would really be that strong to be quiet. So I pushed forward later into the night as it was getting dark. We were made to crawl through freezing mud, blindfolded, and bus to different locations. A trailer was set up there with audio loudly piping quotations Boots by Rudyard Kipling, specifically the 1950 recording of the poem that is used for its psychological effect during SEER School. SEER School, by the way, is survival, evade, resist, escape. This is like what SEALs, pilots, certain people go through. This is a school that they go through in order to make sure they have the skills to adapt if they were ever captured as prisoners of war, and the instructors are trained as they have left and right lower limits of what they can and cannot apply, and obviously every bit of risk analysis is applied as they do this as their daily job, not once a year rotating leadership that is randomly selected on who wants to be the chief that leads the Chiefs, right? There is a lot of things that could have gone wrong. We were sat in the trailer, blindfolded, listening to the dark for how long? I can't say, though, based on the length of the recording. I estimated over half an hour. I wish to state this more plainly. After witnessing someone in severe mental distress, it was more important to continue quotation's seasonal tradition and stick a selectee blindfolded in the dark to experience something specifically designed for psychological torture with no oversight, sans a single corpsman that would later describe themselves as, quotations, not a mental health professional, listening to a poem about military men going mad over and over and over. Yeah, you're not a mental health professional, but you are a mental health advocate. You are a healthcare advocate. You are a person that is supposed to also annotate signs and symptoms when you say maybe this person should be prompted or pushed up to a higher echelon of care here, where that is the corpsman from this verbiage here or from this post saying they were the corpsman coverage to make sure none of this stuff would happen. But that person didn't say, whoa, 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 I as a positional authority can veto things or say, I don't care what season is going on right now, they are going to the hospital. And I would say that is pure neglect from the standpoint of a medical professional. And that's whether you are the E1 hospital corpsman all the way up to an E9 hospital corpsman or anybody that is in a healthcare setting that is this role or responsibility. When my turn had finally come to face the court to be accepted, I was turned around and forced outside multiple times, each time becoming more unstable and uncertain as what I was supposed to do. The region chief was there and my seasoned chair, irate that I had, quotations, disrespected him, and the co-chair for walking away from him during the throes of my delirium made a point of threatening they would find a way to strip away my commission. I didn't know what I was supposed to say or do. Was I supposed to act as their peer? I thought season was about being the chief at this point. I was having difficulty even standing in one spot without swaying. I still could not stop shivering hours later. Trying to push my way through my mental fog was taking a huge amount of energy. The chief I confided my commissioning news was there and came outside to tell me I still had to go through the process to the end. It's still a ceremony, and that's when it clicked in my head what they wanted. Groveling. That, it turns out, is the core of what season was really about. It wasn't actually about building myself to be a better leader. It wasn't about leading to see myself as the person in a room that needs to make a decision. And it certainly wasn't about being able to trust the people that were putting me through all of this. It was about kowtowing to egos that felt they had crossed the finish line and that anyone who hadn't needed to be punished for it. It's about this fatigued, rotten core of perpetuating psychological abuse to justify that it had to be done to you, because what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I was finally, quotations, accepted after I had sufficiently gotten back on script. I would later find out that the senior list leader of my unit had a choice words as continuing to throw me back outside in my current state, which was likely the largest factor in them deciding to stop. We were taken back to the compound where, unknown to me, my orders expired at midnight. That was a key development, because if you thought this story was over, it is unfortunately just the beginning for me. You guys must understand this. Orders are over is saying she is a reservist, meaning that she was activated on active duty orders to partake in this season, and that essentially after those orders have expired, she is no longer eligible for care or things that might come afterwards as a line of duty. And that will come further in this, because I'm just seeing that a lot of people are trying to cover this up, possibly, or I could infer to that or speculate on that because of what does unfold. Stay tuned. That night, I could get myself to fall asleep. I laid on my cot with swirling thoughts, unable to hear my own internal monologue. A single thought surfaced through my miasma of confusion. Is this what it feels like to die? I went over to the mail tent and had someone who was still awake from our Fleet Marine Force classmate. I described to him what I was experiencing. He told me I should go to the hospital the next day, as there really wasn't anything he could do in the field, though he did give me a Benadryl that mercifully brought me to sleep. The following day, as we packed out and got ready for the ceremony, I realized quickly that a few hours of sleep had not undone the damage of the previous day. My thoughts were still fragmented, my balance was still questionable, and I was trying my best not to appear, for lack of a better term, crazy. One of my classmates realized I was still deeply off and drove me to the pinning ceremony when I realized I shouldn't be operating a vehicle. The second you don't feel like you can safely operate a vehicle, I'd be like, there's probably something medically and clinically wrong with you that is not normal, that is off, that somebody should, with a better mental capacity and knowledge of educated guesses, or I should say theories and tested things in science called medical school, maybe a doctor, might actually want to take a look at you. And that's because one bout of sleep would not get somebody out of the stupor of having hypothermia and the lasting effects. Who knows if the cot areas, she's saying cot, so I'm assuming these are like training areas that aren't, fully warm to their degree, and the warming up process of having hypothermia can be quite extensive, and you don't want to go back into the cold after you've had this. So this is quite scary that nobody was actually monitoring this. Somehow I pushed through the pinning ceremony without passing out or worse. My parents got to see me and have all the pride at their daughter making chief. It all felt hollow and meaningless to me. Afterwards, my husband and some friends that had driven out to celebrate went to dinner. During the dinner, I had a bizarre disassociation while holding up a spoon, hearing the voices in my head of, quotations, "Where's your spoon?" The practice of us having to hold up the utensil to, quotation, spoon fed during season. Started having chest pains. I thought I was having a heart attack. My husband and one of our friends rushed me to the hospital nearby. Do you guys remember the beginning of this video where I said that anybody that is having a heat stress injury, having a hypothermia, heat or cold, can obviously go into arrhythmias that could be cardiac arrest, could be in other variable arrhythmias that essentially could have killed her, and this could have been it. The hospital gave me a clean physical bill of health but couldn't account for my mental state. They recognized I was severely fatigued and advised I followed up with my regular doctor, which I did later that week. She ordered an MRI to ensure I had not had a stroke, which also came back clean. Everything said I was healthy, but my road to recovery was very slow. I was given a 2-week disability from work as my job was very mentally demanding and I was barely in a state to take care of basic bodily functions, let alone work. My husband had to help bathe me the first few days as I could not stand long enough to do it myself. I kept floating in and out of lucidity. Slowly over time, I returned to a functional, if not fully normal state. 3 weeks after pinning, I went back to drill. During it, I was given a page 13 to sign by the medical department saying that I was temporarily not physically qualified, TMPQ, for reasons unrelated to my military service. I was confused and it had nothing to do with my mental state. The only reason I had gone to the hospital that Saturday is because I literally could not on Friday. My not being on orders was nothing but a technicality. Anybody that's reservist has line of duty, meaning if you're injured during your time of active service, that's on the Saturday, Sunday that you are drilling, that could be covered by the military. Now, it is key that her orders ended at a specific time. They did not have access to phones. They did not have access to keys. And she is now being told that whatever she endured would not be military affiliated, which essentially, if she had any long-lasting effects from this, would not go in her military medical record, which, by the way, she would be entitled to Veteran Affairs compensation if there were long-lasting effects from the treatment, which could be psychological, from the physical, which could be hypothermia, all these other things. They're trying to legally get her to not be able to be entitled to any benefits for the suffering that she endured during Chief Petty Officer season. That technicality would become one of the cornerstones of the unraveling of my career. I was told to be evaluated by a psychologist for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. The irony of being asked to evaluate post-traumatic stress disorder that apparently had immaculate non-service related conception was not lost on me. I navigated the clunky reserve TRICARE system around the holidays, leading me to not getting an appointment until mid-January of 2022. The provider naturally wanted several follow-ups in order to properly evaluate me. She ultimately diagnosed me with anxiety and depression, neither of which were really out of the norm for how someone would react given the events that happened to me. I was not prescribed anything and advised to seek therapy if I felt necessary. I declined, not because I felt that I didn't need it, but because I knew it would add additional delay to the process. I know if you wanted meds, you should advise or ask as a provider, but also the patient could also ask that if that's what they were looking for. Again, this is a very cute, just chief season. It was, 6 weeks, or maybe that last final week as well, where they're like, maybe we don't want to give meds. I don't know the thought process of the provider, but I will say that it is kind of on both. No one's going to force meds. And obviously, there's been a lot of people that have talked about having issues with medications just being thrown at them in the military health system. So I think a lot of people are kind of like, do I or not give it? In April of 2022, the medical office told me since I was diagnosed with anxiety, I was being submitted for a medical review board to determine if I would be allowed to continue serving. They did, at least, I can't say this word, to submitting the package as being service related. Weeks turned into months. I kept a steady back and forth with medical, asking what they needed and filling paperwork between various provider offices and the Navy medical office. They had a frustrating habit of waiting until I saw them in person to tell me that they had yet another piece of paperwork that required my signature. I started asking over and over when I would hear back from the medical board. Orders came and went, and I tried to submit but was denied due to my status. Medical submitted my package to Bureau of Medicine August of 2022, who found there was not enough evidence to prove that what had happened to me was service related. I was not allowed to review the package prior to it being submitted, and I don't know if it contained a statement from the medical chief that oversaw season and was the one who had ordered me to have a psych eval to begin with. I was offered the chance to appeal, but why bother? I had no new information to offer the board. I certainly didn't think I would get written testimony from the witnesses of what happened to me, and this would only add additional delay. She was hazed and neglected during season, was told it wasn't during the time that she was on orders. They tried to silence her through that. They then put her up for a medical board to try and pretty much get rid of her and say, you're too broken for the military. And then they were like, well, there's not enough to say it's service connected, so they were going to screw her over that way. I just see this domino, and essentially somebody's got to step in to try and advocate for this person. The entire package had to be resubmitted again to BUMED, apparently now as a quotations not a line of duty version. This took an additional 4 months as apparently some system was down, and I was assured that there was no positive way to simply mail the package, which contained absolutely no new information from the first. It finally went in January 2023. In February, I received full medical clearance. I finally felt relief. Maybe I would finally put this all behind me. Maybe I could finally commission. I was wrong. You have to understand that because of this delay or this block in her record, she's a reservist. So if she wanted to go on active orders, if she wanted to go commission, if she wanted to do anything career-wise, she was going to be hindered, right? And some people do like the activated orders because they do get healthcare benefits during that time. They also could get extra pay and things like that while they are trying to rack up points in order to be able to retire. So essentially, she is being hindered entirely in this entire process and had no control over her career about that. The process for my conditional release to make it through all of the chops took another 3 months. The officer quotation scrolling process put me past the date my original commissioning physical expired, and apparently they ran out of quotas for fiscal year 23. So the earliest I could commission was now October of 2023, over 2 years after when I was selected. I worked with my officer recruiter to attend MEPS again, the third time in my career, and worked through the additional paperwork they requested involving some other appointments I had. During my exam, the provider told me that I would need another screening for having seen a psychologist back in March of 2022. A step I had originally taken to clear my mental health status. And that brings me to now. I still am not commissioned. I have full 3 years past when I had begun the process of working with a recruiter, and 2 years since the hospital visit caused by Chief Season. I am currently waiting for MEPS to clear me for military service despite BUMED already having done so, and despite the fact I'm still currently serving. To give you guys context for this, a commissioning physical is good for 2 years. So obviously by the time you do the commissioning physical, you put all the paperwork in a package together to submit to a board that will convene to see who they want to select for commissioning. That could be months, maybe a year, whatever the case may be as you're gathering stuff together. So essentially she had done all that, did it, and then now, because it's been too late, that old commissioning physical is now invalid because it's been greater than 2 years. She was on that hold because of the Chief Season, all that she endured, and now they're saying she had to get another one, but then again, she's on block again because she has to be told by MEPS to go back again to get all this other paperwork, which all of that was linked to military service while she was already in. But for some reason, the way that the military works, essentially it's like treating you as if you're brand new through the system again, and you're going through MEPS at 18 years old trying to lie and say nothing is wrong with you, when in reality the military knows damn well they know what's wrong with you because it's all in your record. What is changing that you can't serve as a chief petty officer, right, at a very high level of leadership, that you can't just cross over and say, we've accepted you, you're part, we already know that. As long as you are not limited duty, you are brought over. But instead, they bring these people through the ringer on bureaucracy, and she covers that further in this post. The actions of the Chiefs mess during my season caused irreparable damage to my career, and I have not received an apology or even acknowledgement for what happened to me and how it's still affecting me to this day. Seeing a mental health provider can absolutely harm your career. I was not prescribed medication, was still submitted for an MRR, which has added literal years of delay to me being able to commission. I'm already out nearly a full 2 years time and grade as an officer, and over $10,000 in lost wages from missed orders and drill pay I would have received if I'd commissioned. While the root of this incident is the actions of Chief Season, much of the resulting delay is fundamentally broken in labyrinth bureaucratic processes that clearly do not interface with each other. The Navy complains about retention while actively making it difficult for people who want to stay to do so. So why am I posting this now? As part of having to redo my commissioning physical, I had to go through yet another psychological screening for MEPS to understand the circumstances of the panic attack and my hospitalization 2 years ago. Because BUMED already having signed it off and me currently serving is apparently not sufficient. When I explained chief season in the lead up to this episode, the provider asked me point blank, quotations, "From what you described, this sounds like hazing to me. Would you describe what you went through as hazing?" End quotes. The conditioned part of me to protect the mess wanted to reflexively say no, as we had reminded so many times of how what has happened to us was totally not hazing, and how you should have seen what it was like back in my day. Now that was hazing. But I always knew it was a lie, even as I was going through it. And here was someone that was actually qualified to evaluate the psychological distress that it caused me. Someone officially qualified to call this for what it was. Yes. And it does appear that the people, I would say, that are appropriate chains of command, or the people that should be having their pulse on this, actually do. And that is the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. That's James Honey, which has been in power for a little over the year. And he's talked about the difficulty of changing chief culture and kind of making this more apparent. I do want to see what the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy is going to do, because I cannot find that post anymore. But essentially they had said, we have emailed you or we have direct messaged you. We are reaching out to try and fix this. We'd like to hear more from you and try and correct this. But I will say that what we are seeing here, in my opinion, is another continued eroding of the Chiefs mess. And what I want to say is I don't think we're going to see the same fraternity or brotherhood that was seen back in the day, or the good old boys club, or whatever people want to call that, because whether people believe it or not, the next generation is coming through, and they are going to have the similar ideas of posting stuff across social media because they didn't have the voice or were strong enough to say it at the time that they could have in 2021. But they're going to come back and regurgitate everything that happened. And I do hope that there are people that are wearing an anchor right now that will advocate for this sailor and appear chief at that is, I would say, looking for help on multiple facets. I would say administratively getting things back on track for her career. Health-wise, getting a line of duty, which she does not mention that she ever got, which means she could have paid for this stuff out of pocket as well as losing money, which God, I hope is not the case, because I do believe that if you do endure some kind of illness or ailment or whatever that you do endure from active service, should be treated and handled by a military provider, or actually, without enduring any form of cost. But I think there were a lot of people here that could have stepped up and said a few things and didn't, and this is where we're at. But it looks like people are taking this seriously. I will do a follow-up on this story, as I believe that there's a lot more that we could cover and learn from this. But this is where I get to you guys in this long video. What do you guys think about this topic and about Chief season? Because we know it's coming again next August, and we'll see what happens. But as always, if you guys like this channel, hit me up over on Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, or down in the comments below. I love you guys. I'll see you next time.